Talking about the
festival.
girls.
Yeah, the boys talking about the girls. I know, isn't that the way it always seems too? I kind of hate that. OUTshine Film Festival is going on. It's going to be a fun conversation. Lots of big news. Biden speaking last night.
Yes,
Yeah.
Biden.
Historic. Amazing. I've got Jeff Oliverio with me today.
Woo!
He's going to be in charge of the national dinner for the National Task Force and the Hollywood LGBTQ Plus Council.
Are we invited?
And Keisha.
Everyone's invited. Tickets on sale soon.
Well, welcome to Queer News Tonight, the world's first and only LGBTQ daily evening news. It's time to queer up the news. History is made. Watch this.
Madam Speaker, Madam Vice President. No president has ever said those words from this podium. No president has ever said those words. And it's about time.
The soundbite says it all. It is 7 p.m. Thursday, April 29, and we are literally out of the closet and into the headlines. So many of your important stories we're going to tell this evening on Queer News Tonight. The world's first live daily queer evening news show. Out of the closet and into the headlines on Q News Tonight. Well, thank you for joining Queer News Tonight. This is the world's first and only unedited live LGBTQ evening news show. That means whatever happens, you're going to see it. This evening, we bring you the news of and a perspective representing the LGBTQ community from here in South Florida, America, and across our planet. I'm your anchor at Queer News Tonight, Al Ferguson. Let's first up welcome anchor Jeff Oliverio. He is a founding member and treasurer of the Hollywood LGBTQ Plus Council, a unique community civic organization designed to unite the LGBTQ plus community in Greater Hollywood. He is also a private financial advisor and the current co-chair for the upcoming National LGBTQ Task Force 25th Anniversary Gala. Good evening, Jeff.
Thank you for having me.
And next up, let's welcome Keisha Chad. He is a health and promotion and peer navigator at Care Resource, one of America's top nonprofit organizations providing comprehensive health care for the LGBTQ community. He also serves as a board member at Unity Coalition, the first and only organization for South Florida Latinx, Hispanics, and the indigenous LGBTQ community, advancing quality here in South Florida. Good evening, Keisha.
Hey, what's going on? Congratulations to Simone on RuPaul's Drag Race. Yes.
Yes.
That's great. Well, tonight we begin with the queer headlines. The LGBTQ community in South Florida and across America is diverse. Our community across the world is vast, and here are the bullet points of the queer news for today, Thursday, April 29. Let's begin by queering up South Florida. AHF Florida AIDS Walk raises $2 million for South Florida LGBTQ. The news about the first major in-person LGBTQ event in America just keeps getting better. The Florida AIDS Walk and Music Festival was held this weekend on Fort Lauderdale Beach. News is encouraging that COVID-19 protocols were successful and that the AHF-sponsored event raised an astounding $2 million. The event was also sponsored by Wells Fargo and Office Depot. The star-studded event included a beach concert with Lil' Kim and Trina, benefited so many of South Florida's LGBTQ nonprofits, especially focused on HIV and health services. Any donation, we remind you, that you make through May 30 will continue to be matched dollar for dollar by AHF. Let's look at some of the highlights. Watch this.
And together we are stronger. Together we can, end the HIV epidemic and make a difference for all of the people in our community.
Absolutely. Thanks to AIDS Healthcare Foundation. And 1, 2, 3.
are saved. Thank you, AHF. Thank you, Wells Fargo. Awesome.
We are SunServe. Thank you, AHF. Thank you, Office Depot. Thank you, Wells Fargo.
Well, I mean, I think that's just amazing to see that excitement and seeing the community come together is just inspiring for all of us.
Yeah. What'd you think, Keisha?
Well, I was there in attendance.
I saw you in that video.
Yes, I was squatting with the winning team, Latino. Well, we're all winners, especially in fundraising, but Latino Salud, they fundraise the most. I really enjoyed being reunited with the community. I was very nervous because of, not being around people a lot, but the event was great. Love Little Kim, love Trina, was happy to be around everyone again.
Yeah, it was exciting. Of course, I did many interviews at the AIDS Walk, and I asked production tonight to move the camera 12 feet back so you can't see my forehead in terms of the AIDS Walk burn that I had. It was quite exciting, and of course, historic, $2 million. Come on.
Yeah, that's
But beyond that, this was the first major LGBTQ event in the entire nation. Very rewarding that it took place here in South Florida, and also very rewarding that you don't hear lots of cries going on of how terrible it was because of violations of COVID-19. The protocols worked. Congratulations to everyone involved in it.
Great. We continue to queer up South Florida. 3 transgender people allege abuse at Miami jail. The Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund sent a letter to Miami-Dade County Mayor Daniela Levine Cava yesterday. The complaint centered on 3 transgender people that suffered alleged abuse at a Miami jail last year after police arrested them during a Black Lives Matter protest. They said Christian Paladine, a college student who identifies as a trans man, was attending a Black Lives Matter protest in Miami on May 31st, 2020, when Miami-Dade police officers arrested him and charged him with violating a countywide curfew. Paladine arrived at the Turner Guilford Knight Correctional Center a short time later, and the letter notes personnel abused him because of his gender identity. The letter to the mayor said, quote, "The staff at TGK subjected Mr. Paladine to degrading and outrageous treatment because he is transgender. TGK staff forced him to strip and display his genitals in front of a group of officers, part of a series of invasive, pseudo-medical, sexualized procedures conducted on him for no legitimate purpose. TGK staff also belittled Mr. Paladine, publicized his transgender status to others, asked gratuitous questions about his anatomy, and called him derogatory names." The letter, among other things, notes Paladine underwent an examination that focused solely on his transgender status, and it took place in a public area where others could easily see and hear him and the person questioning him. The letter says the officer who conducted the exam asked him multiple questions about his genitals and plans for future medical care, such as, "Do you want a penis in the future?" Paladine alleges he was forced to take a pregnancy test because of his genitals, and officers mocked him because of his gender identity. Paladine also says officers forced him to undergo a strip search and placed him in solitary confinement before his release. Jay Bucci and Gabriela Amaya Cruz on July 19th, 2020, attended a rally in March for Black trans women in downtown Miami. Miami-Dade police officers brought them to the Turner Guilford Knight Correctional Center after they arrested them. Both walked through similar examples of their anti-trans treatment by the officers and staff. A virtual press conference organized by the TLDEF, the Southern Poverty Law Center, and the Harvard LGBTQ+ Advocacy Clinic discussed all 3 incidents. Currently, there has not been an official response from the Miami-Dade County Mayor's Office.
This is so upsetting to hear. I feel like there was a failure on the end of the jail, right? Because even though someone may be accused of committing a crime, there's still basic human decency that wasn't followed through. When someone is being entered into the system, you still need to have consideration to their sexual orientation, their gender expression, their religion, their ethnicity. They still deserve respect.
I would advise the Miami-Dade Mayor's Office to respond to this letter and complaint. And the reason is because they have a White House that is breathing down their neck. The Department of Justice has indicated that trans protection in terms of violation of civil rights and identity rights is very significant. And you saw what the president said last night in the joint session of Congress. And it is something so beyond acceptable. It is just beyond. And Miami-Dade County faces not only legal actions, which is what Southern Poverty Law Center and the Harvard organization is suggesting, but they face a chase from the Department of Justice and federal authorities.
Well, I just feel that, we look at these stories and you see Miami-Dade County being a supposed welcoming place for our community. And this goes back to training. It goes back to, having policies in place that the sensitivity training of every employee of the government at any level and how to respect our community is just ultimately important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's queer up entertainment. A gay Michigan couple are flipping homes in Detroit on their very own HGTV show. It's the newest show on the HGTV network, Bargain Block. Stars personal and professional partners Keith Burnham and Evan Thomas. Follows the couple as they put a unique spin on the concept of house flipping. They buy boarded up and abandoned houses in neglected Detroit neighborhoods for as little as $1,000 and live in them while they invest their own money, fixing them up, and bringing them back to life. Burnham said, "We love taking on the absolute worst of the worst. The house that no one wants or believes in. That's our jam." End quote. He shared he was disowned by his family when he came out, feels especially at home in Detroit's land of misfit houses. Burnham, an artist, and Thomas, who has a PhD in physics from the University of Colorado, met through Match.com. The hardship of purchasing the type of homes they are renovating in Detroit breaks many stereotypes of what gay men can do.
Well, it's a symptom of and a symbol of that visibility matters. So I'm happy that the two guys have this new show. I'm also very happy that it breaks the stereotype, because we have this stereotype that gay men can't wield a hammer and a nail. And these two guys are saying, oh, no, we can take the worst of the worst for $1,000. Detroit has, I read, like 60,000 homes that have been abandoned. And so they're going in and buying them up for nothing, but they're disasters, and they're going to, on HGTV, turn them into something. And I love that two gay guys are doing that.
Well, I'm sure that, I've been dabbling with my Discovery Plus app, so I've seen probably every episode of some of the home makeover shows recently, but it's great to see that they're getting representation on the network, because their audience is obviously a huge LGBTQ audience, and, there's a abundance of white women on that network, so it's kind of good to see women of color and some gay men. And
I'm not sure if you know, there's a difference in wielding a television remote control and a hammer. They're different.
They are.
You know that, right? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, we're glad the two add to our diversity. Next, we are going to queer up gay culture. Someday your prince will come. Keisha, be excited here. At Queer News Tonight, we continue to bring gay culture to our news broadcast from writers, artists, photographers, and more. And tonight we bring you well-known photographer Paul Freeman and his latest news. His new books, Larrikin Prince and Larrikin Bravado, are now available. We are showing you photos that are possible, well, without censoring them too much, hint, hint. Freeman said, quote, "Larrikin Prince harks back to the European themes of my heroic collection, but is shot entirely on location. When I was kindly offered the use of a 17th century French chateau," gosh, don't you love those words? When I was kindly offered the use of a 17th century French chateau and grounds, I knew that this would be the core of something very special. I quickly organized and coordinated as many men as I could, wow, to travel to northern France, and lugged as many costumes and wigs as I could from London, end quote. We encourage you to take a closer look. You can learn more at Paul Freeman, his fine art, and more at his website and social media.
Yeah, you had me as traveling with as many men as I could. But no, this is a great piece of art, I'm sure, for all to enjoy.
Yeah. Right.
Paul Freeman, if you ever need any assistance or producers, I am very much available, as long as you pay.
Yeah. Well, and pay can come in all forms.
Yep.
This is interesting. I have followed his career. I haven't seen either of the books yet, but I'm very excited to do so, and I will. And you had me at French Chateau.
Hold my wig.
Yeah, hold my wig, right.
Let's queer up social media. Discord is a battleground in a growing porn moral panic. This month, social media messaging app Discord cracked down on NSFW content access for iOS users. After popular backlash, Discord walked back some of its restrictions, but not all of them. In its revised iteration, Discord will ask 18 and over users to opt in to NSFW content on desktop before being allowed to view it on iOS devices. NSFW servers deemed specifically focused on explicit pornographic content will still not be accessible on iOS altogether. When reached for a comment, a Discord representative said that its NSFW restrictions were made in compliance with Apple's iOS App Store policies. Apple has firm restrictions on nudity in the App Store and only grants developers an exception for incidental NSFW content. I guess like a nip slip, maybe. Viewer use opt-in. Whether Apple or Discord is responsible for the policy, the messaging platform's move toward NSFW censorship is as concerning as it is unsurprising. Social media companies have increasingly cracked down on all adult content over the past few years. Tumblr famously banned NSFW material in 2018, and Patreon began targeting erotic hypnosis content the following year, followed by anime porn and yaoi. Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook have all faced credible accusations of shadow banning sex workers. Safe harbor for smut creators is becoming increasingly rare online. Even independent art site Artiful officially banned 18+ material in its terms of service this month.
The internet is not as sex positive as we would hope it to be. It's really disappointing and disheartening to see that, content creators don't really have a place to put their stuff. It's just sex shaming in a way too. Like, what moral standard or what moral compass are we to aspire to? I'm really confused by it.
The chief culprit behind this is Apple and Google. Apple and the App Store and Google Play are what principally are behind this. And these platforms are making these decisions because they cannot take the risk of Apple responding to them negatively or Google responding to them negatively. And so as a result, that is what creates the situation. I agree with you. We seem to be stepping back in terms of where we are. Of course, we don't want minors to be exposed to adult content, but that's not what's at play here. That's an excuse of what they're talking about. And the other thing that I think is interesting is they're driving content to OnlyFans and Just for Fans, where once upon a time it was completely what OnlyFans or Just for Fans was designed to do. But content providers are going there left and right to show photographs. Photographers are going there. There's all kinds of adult content going to OnlyFans and Just for Fans that OnlyFans never intended to be there, but they have no choice, and that's how they're using it.
Well, I also think, our country's always focused on, protecting people from nudity and sex and not from guns and violence, and that's probably a much bigger issue that we should be focused on.
Yeah, that's absolutely.
Mic drop.
Yeah, right.
Next week, we're up the USA. Virginia black man shot 10 times by police is gay. The National Black Justice Coalition, a DC-based LGBTQ rights organization, issued a statement this week disclosing that an unarmed 32-year-old black man who was shot as many as 10 times by a sheriff's deputy in Spotsylvania County, Virginia, on April 21st is gay. An attorney representing the family of shooting victim Isaiah Brown stated at an April 26 news conference that the deputy should have known that Brown was holding a phone and not a gun before the deputy fired multiple shots that struck Brown. Attorney David Haynes said, quote, "After viewing the Spotsylvania County Sheriff's deputy's body cam video and listening to the 911 call, it is evident that the tragic shooting of Isaiah Brown was completely avoidable. The deputy in question made multiple basic policing errors and violated established protocols," end quote. David Johns, executive director of National Black Justice Coalition, said Isaiah's black and gay same-gender loving identity will likely make it more difficult for his family to attain accountability for the officer responsible. Still, black LGBTQ plus people continue to die by violence, often unreported, perpetrated by police officers and other state-sanctioned actors who do not value Black Lives Matter.
Well, you know, first, the only thing that gets worse than what's happening to people of color, black lives by police in the United States is add the additional ingredient of being gay. It just adds to the problem. I just tell you broadly, I am so sick of this story. It's gut-wrenching to watch what's going on in America. And we are in a situation where no one wants to defund the police. That was commandeered by Tucker Carlson, and he turned that into a privilege. But what's really going on is an issue that we have got to do police reform in America, and that's really what
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, it just goes back to that training and to understand people more about, you know, their identity and how to deal with situations. And you know, many police are not trained appropriately to take those roles in society, and violence is what leads to more violence.
Yeah. Well, let's continue by queering up the world. Discrimination against LGBTQ plus community is damaging Eastern Europe's economic growth. Anti-LGBTQ plus discrimination is costing Eastern European countries almost 2% a year in economic growth. Yesterday, a coalition of dozens of global companies promoting LGBTQ plus acceptance revealed that Hungary, Poland, Romania, and Ukraine are losing billions of dollars each year. According to a report from Open for Business, OFB, this is due to the lack of equality for the LGBTQ plus community in legislation and the workplace, as well as higher health costs related to HIV, AIDS, and depression. In all aforementioned countries, same-sex activity is legal. However, it's difficult for LGBTQ plus people to live authentic lives as they are still denied the right to marry and are continuously met with discrimination and prejudice. OFB found that these countries are facing a brain drain of skilled workers and are struggling to win foreign investment. George Pervlov, the report's lead author, said, quote, "Countries that are more open in terms of LGBTQ plus rights are generally speaking financially and economically in a much better place," end quote. The recent anti-LGBTQ plus policies in Poland in particular have been met with widespread condemnation.
Well, I mean, obviously the economics of, you know, creating a welcoming space for the LGBTQ community is well proven. So I would suggest that these countries read up on some of their counterparts and what they're doing to attract tourism and to attract investment in their country. I mean, it's just a proven fact.
Minorities always produce the biggest influence in any society. In America, if we're going to talk about Blacks and LGBTQ community, we're the most influential in the country and in the world. So to any country or government that wants to discriminate against a group of people, just remember that you are hitting in your own pockets and you will suffer, because queer people are some of the most loyal. When we are behind a business or a country, you will get rich.
Poland in particular, this is we're at the end of the 4th month of 2021. At Queer News Tonight, we've probably done a dozen stories about what's going on in Eastern Europe and these 4 countries specifically. And we're in a situation where we've reported backlash after backlash after boycott after backlash. Now some of the Polish LGBTQ free zones, as they're called, said, oh no, it's all a lie. Please, we never meant it to be what it is.
Girl, please.
And the reason they're saying that is because they're losing lots of money. Keep up the pressure because boycotts work.
Engage, get you rich.
Yeah.
Come on.
Our dollar is just as good as someone else's. Next, we queer up trans rights. Biden tells trans youth, your president has your back. Trans America and LGBTQ America is celebrating last night's speech from President Joe Biden. In his first address to a joint session of Congress, President Joe Biden ranged over a wide variety of issues, but took time to call for passage of the Equality Act and give a shout out to transgender Americans. After promoting his proposed American Jobs Plan, American Families Plan, police reform, and other measures, he said, quote, I also hope Congress can get to my desk the Equality Act to protect the rights of LGBTQ Americans. Let's say that one more time. But unique in the history of the United States, he went one step further. Watch this.
I also hope Congress will get to my desk the Equality Act to protect LGBTQ Americans. To all transgender Americans watching at home, especially young people, you're so brave. I want you to know your president has your back. Another thing, let's authorize the Violence Against Women Act, which has been law for 27 years.
I really appreciate the acknowledgement from this government, from this administration. LGBTQ community deserves it. However, I want them to not just acknowledge us, I want action also to support that same shout out. Shout outs are great, but action and results matter just as much.
Well, I mean, I think I just thought how far we've come when I think Obama was the first to, use LGBTQ in a State of the Union address, and then we had, marriage equality, and now we have Biden, speaking directly to the trans community. We can't let that slide as a huge amount of progress in what's maybe a 12-year period.
Yeah.
So it's light years from where we would have been, just 2 decades ago.
I had a friend today. He sent me a text. He goes, Al, on Queer News Tonight, are you going to report Biden talking, a comment on trans? And I said, are you kidding?
Yeah.
Are you kidding?
No brainer.
And the reason is because, and we're going to talk about this in our segment that we're doing at OUTshine in terms of the history in the lesbian community from 1972. Can you imagine in Stonewall riots in 1969 in the first 40 years? To your point, Jeff, more has happened in the last decade than the first 40 years.
Absolutely.
After Stonewall. It's quite an amazing, amazing achievement.
That is our queer headlines for today. So let's catch up on the LGBTQ news surrounding COVID-19 with our special segment called Quarantine Quickies. Queer News Tonight has been LGBTQ America's most important news source on the pandemic, as we have reported on coronavirus on every news broadcast since January 6, 2020.
Tonight, we report the devastating effect coronavirus has had on the American and worldwide LGBTQ community in total cases and deaths. We also hope of a new light at the end of this long tunnel. As of tonight, more than 2,308,000 LGBTQ Americans have contracted COVID-19, and more than 41,000 LGBTQ Americans have died from coronavirus. As of today, more than 234 million vaccination doses have been administered in the United States.
That is our COVID-19 news for tonight. Next, we report that Happening Out Television Network is passionate about our support for the LGBTQ community. An example is Sunshine Cathedral, the world's largest queer church here in Fort Lauderdale.
We are broadcasting here from our permanent set here at Sunshine in supporting that partnership. The network broadcasts the largest LGBTQ religious broadcast in the world, with more than 30,000 watching every Sunday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern, and it's totally live. We encourage you to tune in. Our campaign sponsorship proudly supports Sunshine Cathedral, is my queer church. Watch this.
This is Mo Laredo, local law enforcement in South Florida, and Sunshine Cathedral is my queer church.
We'd also like to thank our set designer, Concepto Modern Living here in Fort Lauderdale, for making this set in this amazing queer church campus possible.
Finally, we thank Queer News Tonight's hotel sponsor, Best Western I-95 Fort Lauderdale. This is the closest and best choice to the famous Wilton Drive, and our hosts and guests stay at this LGBTQ ally partner. We encourage you to stay here when visiting South Florida.
Well, this evening's episode of Queer News Tonight is sponsored by the OUTshine LGBTQ+ Film Festival. Happening Out Television Network serves as the premier sponsor for the OUTshine Film Festival, happening now through May 2nd. You can purchase your tickets and passes now at outshinefilm.com. Watch this.
Get your tickets now for the 23rd annual edition of the OUTshine LGBTQ+ Film Festival, happening April 23rd to May 2nd. Don't miss our incredible grand opening drive-in event, followed by 10 days of non-stop films from here and all around the world that you can watch at home. Watch trailers and get your tickets at outshinefilm.com now.
Queer News Tonight is proud to showcase many of the film directors during the OUTshine LGBTQ+ Film Festival. And tonight, we are pleased to feature the film Once a Fury.
The Furies were a 1970s lesbian feminist collective that advanced the notion of lesbian separatism to correct what they called the zigzag and haphazard straight women's movement. The Furies were intense. 12 women began the group, worked together, and then broke up in just under 2 years. In that short time, they wrote and published a widely read newspaper, also called The Furies, that advanced their ideology and still seems relevant 50 years later. Once a Fury profiles former members of The Furies, the notorious 1970s lesbian separatist collective that published a national newspaper and planned to seize state power.
The film features interviews with 10 of the original 12 Furies, photography by Joan E. Byron, and archival materials. Joining us tonight is director-producer Jacqueline Rhodes and former Fury interviewee Ginny Benson. Once a Fury is Jacqueline's first feature film. She is currently a professor of writing, rhetoric, American cultures, and an author. Ginny is a lifelong activist and former Fury. Her memoir, Olivia on the Record, was just published by Ant Loot Books and details her role in establishing Olivia Records.
To tell us more about Once a Fury, virtually playing at the OUTshine LGBTQ+ Film Festival, starting today through Sunday, May 2nd, our director-producer, Jacqueline Rhodes, and former Fury interviewee, Jenny Burson. Welcome to Queer News Tonight. We're happy to have both of you with us.
Great. Thanks for having us on.
Thank you.
Well, let me get it right out on the table right from the very beginning. As I was reading, I haven't seen the documentary yet. I'm very excited to see it at the OUTshine Film Festival. In reading about the documentary and the subject matter of the Furies, I was reminded of the Stonewall riots in 1969, and I was also reminded of the Chicago 7, and I was reminded of the Black Panthers. It was a very civil disobedience time from lesbian women. Am I getting that right, or am I getting it wrong?
I would say you're getting it right, and Jenny can speak to this too because her memoir goes into some detail about this, and so does the documentary. All of the Furies had great credentials as activists from various and sundry other groups, and I mean one of them was a daughter of one of the Chicago Seven. One had done voter registration in the South. A number of them had worked with the Black Panthers. A number of them knew members of the Weather Underground. And so they had a lot of street cred coming into this particular moment.
Yes, it's true. We all were, I think we understood the concept of intersectionality, in fact, before we even had a name for it, and understood that all of these movements that were happening were very connected, but that there was no place really for women, and there was even less place for lesbians. And so, you know, we put that together and said, if we're going to have an impact, we have to separate, we have to create our own space, we have to take care of ourselves because the other movements aren't doing it.
You know, Jenny, I'm curious, you going through this relatively short time of the Furies. Stonewall happens, and principally in our history that we tell in the LGBTQ community of Stonewall, it sparked off by trans representation and drag queens. But I don't hear a lot about lesbian involvement. And so then I find this out about what was going on in the Furies in 1972. Was it separatist? Did gay men not embrace women post early days of post Stonewall? Is that why this separate kind of manifesto developed? Is that why it happened, or?
I think there are really two explanations for that. The first is that no, gay men, I mean, there was a gay movement in the early 70s that was called a gay movement, or sometimes a gay and lesbian movement, but was very dominated by gay men and really did not understand sexism or male privilege and didn't want to deal with it. Basically, gay men were experiencing their own liberation and were not really, in our experience, particularly interested in changing anything about what they were doing or who they were in order to make space for women. So that was part of it. The other part of it was that for a lot of the women in the Furies had been straight until they got into the Furies. And part of our philosophy, part of our political theory was every woman can be a lesbian, and that now.
Losing sound at that moment.
Yeah, Jenny, we're having a little bit of difficulty with your internet. Jacqueline, I want to fold you into this. When you're directing and producing this documentary, were you in your early days? Were you familiar with the Furies?
Oh, absolutely. Actually, I tell the story. This is one of the reasons I started the movie. When I came out in 1984, my lover at the time handed me a box of books and newspapers and said, "You need to read these." It was sort of this enculturation moment. Read these so that you can learn how to be a lesbian. And one of the things in there was a stack of Furies newspapers, and they were 11 or 12 years old at the time, but I just devoured them. I ate them up. And so I had always intended, once I got through grad school, to write a book about it. And because I lived in the shadow of the Furies. They were so influential to me. And I ended up deciding I should make a movie because they're still alive and I can talk to them. And it was just a great moment for me, almost as a fangirl, to talk to all these people who had been so influential to my coming out.
Jenny, I'm curious Jacqueline, I'm curious when Jenny was talking about the what was happening among gay men in the 70s, I was thinking, wait, are you sure we're still talking about the 1970s and not 2021? Because it seems like a fundamental issue in the LGBTQ community. We report extensively at Queer News Tonight about what's happening to lesbian spaces, bars, only 15 left approximately in the United States, and the trend. And there seems to continue to be this schism between gay men and lesbian women in our kumbaya rainbow world of LGBTQ. After what Jenny went through and other activists of the Furies, and then what you were exposed to in the 80s, and now producing this documentary that's going to be seen at the OUTshine Film Festival, are you disappointed today about where we are in our community and relationship between the girls and the boys?
You know, I'm not sure. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised because I think that male privilege is something that's very difficult to unlearn and address, just like white privilege is impossible to unlearn and address quickly. These are things that are absolutely endemic to U.S. culture, and the Furies saw that 50 years ago. And what was interesting in the separatist movement, especially for the Furies, is that it wasn't initially, at least according to Kalita Reed, one of the other Furies, the purpose was not to separate from men, it was to separate from the women's movement, because the women's movement was homophobic. Mm-hmm. The women's movement had separated from the New Left because it was sexist. And so there are all of these clashes that are going on that created a very fractious movement. And so this is one of the reasons I also wanted to make the movie, is that we often look back at the 60s and 70s, and there is a moment. We're looking now at movies about the Chicago 7 and the Black Panthers. There's a moment now to look. But we look back at that history and very often uncritically just sort of dismiss it. Like it was just, you know, a lot of hippies, they went to Woodstock, and then maybe we'll talk about Stonewall for a while, but it was all sort of this one thing. And it actually was about 20 different things. And all these stories really need to be told.
You know, it's interesting to me because you make the connection of it was the anti-women's movement. In almost the same time period here in South Florida, one of the most powerful straight women's faces and voices in America was Anita Bryant. And
That's
she
right.
was famously homophobic. So it's very interesting that you make that connection. I'm curious in terms of the issue for the lesbian community now in America. Frequently, we don't report on it enough at Queer News Tonight. We want to be supportive. We want to be more educated. But frequently we find that many gay men are going, where is the girl community? Where is the lesbian community? Is that a fair statement, or does that come right from privilege, right from the get-go? What do you think about where we are in the lesbian community in America today?
Interesting question. Jenny, do you want to start that one, or do you want me to start that one?
I think it's an interesting question. You know, there was a huge amount of activity, women's music festivals, the Michigan Women's Music Festival, other music festivals. There are still lesbian music festivals that are going on. There's a lot of writing, a lot of publishing. And I think that, and you know, the founders of, at least some of the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement are lesbians. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I think has happened is that, that lesbians have, because lesbians, like all people, come in many varieties, all races, all classes, that we have become part of other movements and bring the fact of our lesbianism and our feminism, and let's not separate those two, because that was really key for the Furies, was uniting lesbianism and feminism together. And we bring that to all of our work, to all of our political work. I'm very active now in doing anti-racist work. And I bring my, what I have learned as a lesbian and as a feminist to that work. And then I bring what I've learned in the anti-racist movements back into my feminist connections in my lesbian feminist community.
And
That's like-
Jacqueline, something you want to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add all of that, especially the connection between lesbianism and feminism. And I think you had wondered if maybe we're not paying attention, and maybe we're not paying enough attention to lesbians. We're certainly out there. Part of it is the politics of naming. I know a number of lesbians who won't call themselves lesbian. I call them lesbian. They say they're gay. And I'm like, okay, well, that's interesting. And it's generational. It's an older generation sometimes it's a younger generation, but there's a politics to naming. And so when I call myself a lesbian, when I identify as a lesbian, this is very much a political move for me because it's tied to feminism. So what's interesting to me is that we're all still around, and lesbian is almost still an insult in some circles. I'm talking about academia right now. I'm known as a queer academic and not necessarily a lesbian academic, because in academia, and this is not true out in the streets, but in academia, queer is relatively tame. And to call yourself a lesbian is to basically say sex and feminism, and these are unsavory sorts of things. And so actually lesbian is more subversive than queer in my line of work right now. So we're still out there, we're still subversive, and I think, like LPs, we will come back. We're like vinyl. We will be popular again. But yeah, we need to pay attention.
Jacqueline, I just make the connection of how fascinating I think your observation is. When we launched this as the first live LGBTQ news in a television fashion digitally in the world, we argued very extensively right from the beginning, calling it Queer News Tonight. And basically we cowered away from that and launched as Q News Tonight to soft pedal it. Today we say queer, period, and there's universal acceptance. And I think it's interesting of your illustration that queer is easier to embrace than lesbian. Fascinating that this is 2021. I want to bring us back to the film festival and Once a Fury displaying. I would imagine if I say the word, let me identify the name Dinah Shore, for example, that there is a certain age group that instantly understands what that means, and then there's a certain age group in the lesbian community that has no idea what that means. And isn't that kind of what we're talking about here? The Furies, while you recognized it in your coming out experience with your family in the 80s, today there's not mom going, wait, I want to show you some of the newspapers and books of this organization in 1972 that were, advocating anarchy in whatever way you would define that word. So as a result, a film like Once a Fury is so vitally important for our history in the LGBTQ community. Tell us a little bit about what that experience was like, not only in telling the story, we understand the value of the story now, that's really crystal clear, but why you wanted to do it. Tell us how you've gotten to this point, to bring it to OUTshine.
Well, I recognize that people a couple generations past me, the teens, the 20s, the 30s, might not know who the Furies were and why they are still important. And I think that is just a tragedy, because I think it's important for us to know where we came from. I think it's important to look at these connections to our history and see history is not dead. This is part of what we think about now, that a lot of what we see now as radical queer activism finds its roots in a lot of what was happening in the Furies and other groups. So I think that seeing those connections, not just learning that this is history and that it was then, but it was history and it informs us now. And what can we learn from the way that it informs us now? So it was interesting to make it with those two audiences in mind. First, I wanted that audience, the women of a certain age who understand Dinah Shore. Absolutely. I want them to be happy. But I also want some of my new lesbian friends who are 18, 19 years old. I want them to be happy and to see themselves in this too. And I think the part of what will resonate is that this group was in age from, I think, 17 and 18 to about 26 or 27. So it's a young group. So what does it mean to believe something so fiercely and to live it so fiercely? And can you actually do that? And I think that that's still a lesson that we need to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Jenny, any parting observations you would like to make about having your life and participation in the Furies documented in this way that's going to appear in LGBTQ film festivals all over the country?
I'm really glad that Jackie made the film. I think it's a really good film. I have to say, for the Furies, the group of women that she talked to, we have never, as a whole group, talked to each other since the Furies broke up. I mean, we've had, I'm friends with some of the women, other women have had conversations, so it was fascinating to me to hear 50 years later, everyone's perspective on what we did, and to see the threads of how what we did and what we learned and how we were has moved through our lives to this day. I'm very, very excited about the film, and I'm glad for people to know. I think it's important for all of us to always know whose shoulders are we standing on. And because we didn't make this up ourselves, we weren't born, radical lesbian feminists. We became that, and we stood on other people's shoulders. And the people who are doing this kind of work today, some of them are standing on our shoulders, and it's just good to know that. I think it's a really good film, and it's really well done. It's not, I liked it a lot. I like it a lot.
Jenny Burson, first off, we would be remiss at Happening On Television Network and Queer News Tonight to not congratulate your involvement and the significance of this entire group of women that began to do this in the 1970s. Your voice of what you just said rang as clear as a bell. I wanted to tell you, Jackie, in terms of preparing for this interview for the OUTshine Film Festival, I represent the white privilege that we're talking about in this conversation. I clearly know that from the gay standpoint. I texted a friend of mine that is a very noted lesbian representative, very good friend of mine, and I said, I'm doing this interview tonight, and I mentioned, but I had never heard of, I'm just now starting to read it today, about the Furies. And I got a text back and then a phone call that schooled me absolutely to the bone of saying, Al, the inappropriateness of your lack of understanding is an indication of where you should start this conversation, because you would never speak about Stonewall or a pride event run by lots of beautiful gay men that are on floats or anything like that, because this moment of our history is our history foundation in the LGBTQ community. And she said, you would never disrespect the trans community or drag queens from Stonewall, etc. And it brought me to a complete stop of going, wow, we just don't do as well among our LGBTQ as we need to do. Your film is a call to action for that. It allows the history to be put in front of us and say, we might like it, we might not like it, but it pushes us and smacks us right in the face. Here's who we are, now what are we going to do about it? So congratulations to you, Jacqueline, for the creation, and Jenny Burson and all of you that were the original Furies. We can't wait to see this at the OUTshine Film Festival coming this week. You can see it on demand. Make sure you do, because you're going to learn a lot. And you privileged gay guys out there, you're the ones that need to be watching it the most. Absolutely. Jacqueline, right. Jenny, thank you very much for being with us tonight at Queer News Tonight.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Thank you much.
That is today's news for the LGBTQ community on the world's first and only daily LGBTQ evening news show. Is our community important to you?
Then help us by liking and subscribing, ring the bell for updates, share this news. We are the only LGBTQ television live video news in the world that is out of the closet and into the headlines. We need your support.
I'm your anchor, Al Ferguson, and on behalf of anchors Jeff Oliverio and Keisha Chad, we will see you daily at 7 p.m.
Yes,
Good night.
get the vaccine. We have the vaccine. Come to